to highlight that this activity will be recorded in order to promote and diffuse the content of the discussions and the information that we'll be reporting here in our YouTube channel. Okay, so having said that, I would like to give the floor to the chair of the ICIC, Blanca Lili Barracadena, in order to welcome to the activity. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Muchas gracias, estimada Lilian. Muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes y muy buenas noches a todos y cada uno de ustedes quienes nos acompañan en esta ocasión. En representación de las comisionadas y comisionados que integramos el Pleno del Instituto Nacional de Transparencia, Acceso a la Información y Protección de Datos Personales de México, que ostenta la presidencia y secretariado de la Conferencia Internacional de Comisionados de Información, ICIC, me da mucho gusto darles la más cordial bienvenida a este seminario virtual promoviendo la equidad de género en el derecho de acceso a la información, al que hemos convocado con el apoyo invaluable de la UNESCO y el Centro Carter, con motivo de la conmemoración del Día Internacional de la Mujer en este 2022. Antes que nada, saludo con afecto a Jacques Dutoit, jefe de la sección de Acceso Universal a la Información de la UNESCO, quien me acompaña en este panel de bienvenida, a Laura Newman, directora del Programa del Estado de Derecho en el Centro Carter, así como a las personalidades que participarán en la discusión de esta jornada. Ayer conmemoramos el Día Internacional de la Mujer en todo el mundo, una fecha que nos recuerda la importancia de seguir promoviendo y pugnando por la equidad de género en todos los ámbitos y niveles de la vida pública, y en particular en el goce y ejercicio de los derechos humanos, como lo es el derecho de acceso a la información. A este respecto, la promoción, difusión y concientización del derecho a la información con perspectiva de género ha logrado importantes avances en los últimos tiempos. Primero, el derecho a saber se ha hecho cada vez más visible y se ha incluido en el debate público como una herramienta fundamental para que las mujeres vivamos libres de violencia o discriminación, lo que ha contribuido a la sensibilización del tema desde una visión integral. También, con el paso del tiempo, se ha comenzado a desarrollar la divulgación de información especializada en cuestiones de género, con la finalidad de que las mujeres podamos estar más informadas para tomar mejores decisiones y fomentar nuestro empoderamiento. En este sentido, gracias al derecho a saber, las mujeres hoy contamos con mayores espacios para incidir en el diseño de políticas de acceso a la información, pues se nos reconoce como aliadas centrales en la gestión de los problemas que a todas y todos nos corresponden. En tanto, la comunidad global es indispensable seguir alentando y promoviendo el desarrollo de espacios amplios y efectivos de diálogo, también globales, como el que en esta ocasión nos convoca, con el fin de establecer y consolidar intercambios de buenas prácticas y conocimientos para fortalecer las políticas de transparencia y acceso a la información con perspectiva de género. En el marco de esta actividad, compartiremos los resultados del documento trabajado por el Centro Carter, titulado Promoviendo la equidad de género en el derecho de acceso a la información, en el que se realizaron entrevistas a más de 1,600 líderes comunitarios, expertos, funcionarios y funcionarias gubernamentales y sociedad en general, así como visitas a 139 agencias públicas. De este, y a reserva de que sea explicado con mayor detalle, destaco como hallazgo notable la simetría de los flujos de información que se encuentran basados en el género y las barreras a las que se enfrentan día a día las mujeres, como la pobreza, el desconocimiento del derecho a la información o la desconfianza al solicitar la información pública. En este punto me detengo para agradecer la colaboración de la Organización de las Naciones Unidas para la Educación, la Ciencia y la Cultura y del Centro Carter, que en todo momento han mostrado la voluntad para sumar y apoyar esta causa a través de estudios y documentos de trabajo que resaltan la importancia del acceso a la información como una herramienta capaz de generar sociedades más pacíficas, justas e inclusivas. Las diversas experiencias alrededor del mundo nos demuestran que el ideal de una democracia plena, incluyente y participativa no se puede alcanzar sin instituciones y andamiajes legales capaces de responder a los desafíos que plantean la desigualdad y la injusticia. Ante este panorama, las instituciones públicas, los organismos internacionales y la sociedad civil debemos incorporar una visión de género para que las niñas y mujeres puedan alcanzar su potencial en igualdad de condiciones y con ello ejercer sus derechos en plenitud. Finalmente, agradezco la participación de todas las personas que se han hecho presentes en esta jornada, que estoy segura nos permitirá identificar áreas de oportunidad para avanzar hacia la igualdad sustantiva a la que todas y todos aspiramos. Por eso, celebro que en todos los países del mundo estemos llevando a cabo múltiples eventos y actividades para promover, no solamente en las capitales del país, sino en todas las entidades federativas, en el caso de México, el tema de la promoción de los derechos a los que las mujeres tenemos que poder garantizar, pero que al mismo tiempo ejercer para tener una vida más justa y más digna. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Following up to the order of the agenda, please, I will give the floor to Jaco Dutoit, Chief of the Universal Access to Information Section, Communication and Information Sector of UNESCO. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Lillian, and thank you, Commissioner, for those introductory remarks. It's my turn to say welcome also to this webinar that is celebrating International Women's Day. As we have seen, citizens need reliable information to participate in democratic life and contribute to holding duty bearers accountable. And it is in this context that legal and policy frameworks aligned with international standards are needed to foster and enable environments for access to information. In today's webinar, we will look at access to information laws and its role to enable women to exercise their rights. But we will also look at the practices that is happening on the ground. We would like to see how we could advocate for greater access to information for women, and we hope that the discussions will help us to reach this goal. UNESCO is the UN custodian agency of the SDG indicator related to access to information, and your input to capture what gender equality and the right of access to information means would be very helpful in us taking some recommendations further as it relates to this important topic. The UNESCO cooperated with the Carter Center in drafting a policy brief entitled Promoting Gender Equality and the Right to Access to Information. And we thank the authors for their insight and cooperation. And of course, a big thank you also to the International Conference of Information Commissioners for providing us with this multi-stakeholder platform. I'm very happy to see there are more than 72 participants, and we look forward to the interaction with as many of you as possible. Over to you, Lillian. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaco. Now I would like to request to all the attendants to turn on your camera in order to take the official photo of this activity. Just 1 second more. Thank you very much. So, having said that, we thanks again to the Commissioner Blanca Lilia and to Jaco Dutoit for those welcome words. And now I will give the floor to Laura Newman in order to present the the promoting gender equity in right of access to information that the Center Carter developed. Thank you very much, Laura.
Great, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And of course, many thanks to the ICIC and UNESCO for offering me this opportunity to speak. Happy day after International Women's Day. Yesterday, I was looking through a lot of the posts for the day, and I saw something that really struck me. A mom had told her daughter that it was International Women's Day. And the daughter said, "But Mom, women are half of the world's population. Why do we only get one day?" From the mouth of babes. So I think that that is a really important note for why we should be considering women and issues related to gender, not just on International Women's Day, but really throughout the year. So I'm very pleased nonetheless to be celebrating this time with you and considering the issue of women and the right to information. So as we heard from Lillian, access to information is critical for the exercise of civil, political, social, and economic rights. And it's instrumental in improving transparency and accountability. But it's particularly important for women as it allows for more informed, effective decision-making regarding a wide range of issues, whether that's education, land ownership, business opportunities, health, or the promotion and protection of rights. Nonetheless, reality remains a stark reminder of the gap between aspiration and practice, as the right of access to information remains elusive for many women. In the program, we talked about a video, and I was going to show it to you, but I'm afraid that the timing being so short, what I'll do instead is pop in the chat the link to the video, a number of videos to give you an opportunity to see how we've used some illustrations to demonstrate the value. But many of you already know that the Carter Center has been working to advance women's fundamental right to information since 2014, when we first undertook a study to demonstrate whether women, in fact, were able to exercise the right to information with the same frequency, ease, and rate of success as men. The study went a little bit further to say, if not, what were the main obstacles facing women? And if she could overcome those, what would be the most important information for economic empowerment and the promotion and protection of rights? So we started this study first in Liberia and then did it as well in Guatemala and Bangladesh over the course of the next couple of years. In total, we did about 1,700 interviews across the 3 countries and had researchers visit over 139 public agencies 3 times each, just to see what happens when a man comes in and what happens when a woman comes in. As you can imagine, the studies did in fact show that women often are excluded from the value of information and the benefits it provides. In assessing the obstacles, and I know this was mentioned, I just want to say that across the 3 countries, there were a lot of similarities. And we did it in 3 very different places to demonstrate that it really doesn't matter where a woman lives, that she's still impacted by many of those same obstacles. A lot of them included poverty, lack of awareness that she had the right to information or how to exercise it, fear, including fear of asking for information, physical violence, threats, or retaliation for making requests, as well as just dangers related to being a woman in public spaces. There were the cultural constraints, and those didn't just come from men. They also came from mother-in-laws or traditional leaders. It wasn't, you have to look broader when you think about the culture. And there were also issues of lack of mobility and time. We know that women have the double burden of income generation as well as caring for her family, and that left very little time to get to public agency to seek information. We saw a lot of negative mindsets of public officials or poor treatment in public offices, and finally issues around language. So following the study, the Carter Center began some long-term programming in each of the countries, as well as most recently, last year, we launched the Inform Women, Transform Lives campaign, which is now being implemented in 24 major cities around the world, really focusing on local information and reaching women with underutilized services using information as a bridge. But what's become clear is that there's a need for both the international policy to be more explicit around the inclusion of the right to information for women, as well as to encourage national governments to develop and promote gender-sensitive access to information laws, policies, and implementation practices. Most recently, as you heard, I had the privilege to partner with UNESCO to draft a short policy brief to consider some of the potential openings or levers of change at both the international and the national levels that could be used to improve women's right to information. As part of the drafting, I reached out to many of the information commissioners with the support of the ICIC with a brief questionnaire. And I'd like to thank all of the commissioners for sharing with me their very thoughtful responses. In the rest of the time together, I'd like to share with you some of the recommendations that are in that paper. As you'll see, some of them are quite long-term, while others may be able to accomplish more quickly. I will say that for all of these, we need to work together as a community. None of these are going to be achievable with just one group. It's going to take civil society, governments, the international actors, as well as the commissioners. I don't believe my recommendations are exhaustive. So I would welcome hearing from any of you and all of you things that I missed in this paper. I'm not throwing Yakko under the bus, but he only gave me a certain number of pages. So we did try to put in what we saw as the most critical, but I know we missed things. So this is an opportunity today and over the course of the next days to please share with us anything that we missed. So first, I'd like to talk about just some of the ideas around international instruments, reports, platforms, and meetings that might offer an opportunity to advance women's right of access to information. I think it's important to note that the international instruments have been relatively silent about the explicit inclusion of women's fundamental right of access to information. In general, where these instruments have included access to information, it's for women. It's been limited to issues around reproductive rights, as well as information and communication technology, both of which miss the wide benefits that information can provide to women. And for that to happen, these instruments, these international instruments, must explicitly include in their discourse the issue of access to information as well as how to better promote oversight and reporting. In the paper, I provide 5 recommendations. The first relates to the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW Committee. Right now in the convention itself, there's only a few references to women's right to information. And again, that's really around reproductive rights. So my suggestion to the CEDAW committee would be for them to publish a general recommendation or statement on women's right to access to information. And that would accompany the convention itself. I also would suggest that the Commission on the Status of Women, many of you know that there's a 2-week event every year. It used to be in New York, now it's virtual thanks to COVID, but they could consider including, and each year they have a primary issue and then secondary issues that they go back to review. And so the CSW could include women's right of access to information, first of all, in their final statements as part of the proceedings, also through expert panels. I don't know if they're about to do the CSW last year. They really focused a lot on issues around like SDG 16. And yet when you look at their final statement, there was not a single note around women's right to information or even the importance of information. So I think we need to make sure that that gets into the final statements as well as through the proceedings. CSW could also designate women's right of access to information as one of their emerging issues and or a priority theme at a future annual session. Third, the UN special procedures could be mobilized to advance women's access to information. This could be done through a number of ways. First, there's a working group on discrimination against women and girls. They could publish a thematic paper on women and the right of access to information. The same working group goes on country visits. They could consider during those visits making recommendations specific to women's right to information. And the relevant mandate holders could publish joint thematic reports. For example, the special rapporteurs could do a report on women's right of access to information, but it doesn't need to be limited to just the special rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right of freedom of opinion and expression, which covers access to information. We could also look to include special rapporteurs on the right to development, violence against women, its causes and consequences, the special rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights, etc. And I think it would be amazing if we could get all of those rapporteurs to work together on a single paper that identifies both the value of information for women as well as what needs to happen to advance it through international mechanisms. My fourth recommendation looks to the high-level political forum on sustainable development, so the HLPF, and they could publish an annual position paper, including a section dedicated to women's access to information. And with that, we could also call for shadow reporting. So civil society could do shadow reports around access to information generally, which is often missing in shadow reports, and then more specifically around the impact on access to information and the lack of information for women and marginalized populations. And finally, I look at the UN agencies, their programs and funds, which could be further engaged to advance women's access to information. So first of all, I really believe it needs to be mainstreamed into existing programming and focus areas. Secondly, I think there should be developing some joint actions, whether that's between UNESCO and UN Women or UNDP, for publications, events, and forums. And finally, I think the issue needs to be included in the deliberations of the interagency network on women and gender equality. So really, as you can see with these recommendations, trying to build on existing platforms and incorporating access to information. But there's also the national level. And at the national level, right of access to information and their laws play a critical role in promoting a meaningful right of information for women. Considering all those identified obstacles facing women, it's really paramount that national laws and implementation practices are designed to address these challenges. For the most part, access to information laws are gender neutral. And while gender neutral laws are meant to do no harm, they do not respond to the gender specific needs of women. By not acknowledging or addressing the gender dynamics inherent in many parts of the world when it comes to the right to information, the results of gender neutral legislation and implementation just keeps the status quo. And that means that many women remain excluded from the enjoyment of the right and its benefits. For that reason, I'd like to propose 4 additional recommendations that are specific to looking at the national infrastructure and mechanisms. And I just want to say quickly, and I'm trying to go fast because I want to give as much time as possible for the next panel, that what I'm suggesting is not easy. And I'm so glad that Commissioner Begum is with us, because we, the Carter Centers, had an incredible partnership with the Information Commission of Bangladesh to try to help them do this. And as committed as they are, we see how hard this is. So I just don't want to make everybody think that this is a magic bullet or super easy. I get it. I get how hard this is, but I think we have to start somewhere. So when it comes to national norms, first of all, we need to promote gender sensitive right to information laws, whether that means just reviewing the legislation through a gender lens or making sure that there's mandatory support for requesters, particularly women who may be illiterate or functionally literate, incorporating a reduction of fees because of poverty issues when it comes to search, retrieval, and reproduction. That should be based on hardship. We should be explicitly listing information that's most critical to information in proactive publication schemes. For example, information around violence against women. And finally, I really think there should be gender parity, as we have in some of the countries, in the information commissions themselves. So there are a number of countries like Nepal and Bangladesh that legislate gender parity. And I think that encourages a diversity of opinion, and it also models the value of women's participation. Couple other recommendations: access to information practices should be gender sensitive. That might include increasing awareness of access to information for women, placing proactively disclosed information in locations where women can more easily access it, and it's safer for access, like marketplaces or schools. We need to disaggregate data by sex, such as the number of women requesters, how many women are denied information, the number of appeals, particularly appeals because women tend not to appeal, and including those findings in annual reports. There should be gender balance, not just in the Information Commission, but also in designated information officers. So when a woman comes to seek information, she's more likely to see a woman to provide that and not just all men. There needs to be mandatory gender sensitivity training, and also, again, specific support for women, particularly those denied of information. And my last 3 recommendations, I think we need to consider developing a comprehensive strategy in each country, a plan of action, and accompanying dedicated budget to ensure that the right to information is equitable. And finally, we need to encourage open government partnership commitments to include national and subnational actions to advance an equitable right of access to information for women. So I know I went so fast, but there is a paper that will be available soon through UNESCO, but I welcome the opportunity to hear from others. I want to thank again Jaco, the ICIC, and I'm handing it now over to Lillian and Helen for the remainder of this time. And should there be any questions, I'll be here throughout. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Laura. And we will be waiting maybe in the chat if you can share with all of us the video Informed Woman Transform Lives. It would be very appreciated by this network. And of course, we will be waiting as well the report and the documentation that you referred. Well, now it's time to the discussion panel. So I will give the floor to Helen Derbyshire from Access Info Europe. Please go ahead, Helen. Welcome here.
Thank you very much, Lillian. From Madrid, where I'm sitting, it's good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, but good morning, good evening, wherever you are. It's a great honor to be on this panel linked to International Women's Day, addressing this really important issue of how we ensure equity and access to information. It's interesting, even sitting here in Spain, we have at the national level in Spain, with the digital requests that are submitted to the central government, twice as many male requesters as women. I don't know why that is. It's a mystery to me. I filed a lot of requests, but it's really an issue everywhere. Laura has identified it in a number of countries, but it's really an issue everywhere, which is why I think it's very important that UNESCO, the International Conference of Information Commissioners, has convened this discussion. And I would like to congratulate Laura of the Carter Center, Laura Newman of the Carter Center, for your excellent data gathering work, investigation. I know I've done that kind of monitoring myself. I know how time consuming it is, and the really important set of recommendations. What we're going to do on this panel is discuss how perhaps those recommendations, whether those recommendations resonate with our three panelists, and how we can actually act in a practical way to address some of the issues. I'll very briefly say who we've got here, and then I'll introduce each one of them. I've got Lucy Ndungu, the Information Commissioner, or Commissioner on the Administrative Justice from Kenya. Suraya Begum, Information Commissioner from Bangladesh. And Jaime Moreno Valle, who is from the Organization of American States. I am going to post, as I introduce each of them to speak, I'm going to put their biographies in the chat to save us a little bit of time. So, Lucy Ndungu, over to you. How much of what Laura spoke about resonates with you from your work in Kenya? And what do you see we can actually do, and what are the priorities for addressing some of these issues raised? You have only a few minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, please, so we can ensure that we keep time for the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, and my name is Commissioner Lucy Ndungu from the Commission on Administrative Justice, Kenya, designated Commissioner Access to Information. And I do wish to state that what Leslie recommended resonates very well with Kenya. I want to first state clearly that in Kenya, we do have proper laws or legal frameworks which highlight the need to enhance gender parity or gender equity. In our constitution, it provides very clearly that all appointive and elective position must adhere to a principle we call the 2/3 gender principle. And this 2/3 gender principle has been at the forefront when we implement gender issues. At the same time, the same constitution states that the Government of Kenya must come up with affirmative action to ensure that gender parity is implemented. These affirmative actions include ensuring that marginalized, including women, participate and are represented in governance. They must also have special opportunities in education and economic levels. They must also be provided with special opportunity to access employment. They must also have reasonable access to water, health services, and infrastructure. And obviously, under our Article 35, they must have access to information. What has come out very clearly is that all government institutions have tried as much as they can to implement the Constitution by ensuring that we have gender parity, but this has not succeeded. We do find that the situation on the ground is totally different. When it comes to the appointive position, we find that we are just below 30%. 30% of appointive position are male, are female, and 70% are male. When it comes to elective positions, 21% of women are in parliament and 34% are in the county assemblies, meaning that we are still nominated by men. What is the problem? What is it that we need to do as Kenyans? We realize that the way we give information to the women requires to be improved or to be enhanced. We normally use the usual modes of communication, the search engine, the media, the television, the social media. Sometimes we insist they read books. We even tell them to move to social gathering. We have barazas or the chief barazas, but we find that women are not able to access information using these engines, which we have been recommending. And we find that they do not get timely information, no accurate information to empower themselves either politically, economically, or socially. So what have we recommended as the ombudsperson? As ombudsperson, we have recommended that we move further and change the mode of communication by insisting that we use the radios which are at the level, the grassroots level, where women are, when they are working in their homes, when they are working in their chambers, when they are even taking care of their children, they can listen to the radio. We are also saying that our women are religious in nature. They attend religious congregations. We insist that let's take information to them in the religious podium. Let's not just preach the gospel or the Muslim law. Let's insist that we talk of political issues, economic issues, and social issues. And perhaps they are able to know when to plant, when to take the baby to the clinic, or when to attend political rallies. At the same time, as a commission, we also insist that we use the Write Down Women Groups system, which is very well knit in the country. And this can help enhance the access to information to the women. Obviously, as a commission at the global, at the national level, we have also enhanced other strategies where we partner with the UN Women to mainstream gender within government institution, including enhancing access to information. We also partner with Kenya School of Government to educate the public institution so that they are able to enhance access to information. And we are training, we should have male and female. And we also are members of OGP, whereby we insist that access to information should have a gender lens. And I can go on, but I want to say in conclusion that in Kenya, we are trying our level best to enhance access, to enhance gender parity using access to information. I hope I'm on time. Thank you.
Thank you, just Lucy, thank you. That's really impressive, everything you're doing, and the emphasis that you place on the need to be, which is in Laura's recommendations too, the need to be conscious of the proactive approach to addressing this issue, and thinking about where information will reach women. The references that both you and Laura made to the Open Government Partnership are also really important. I sit on the steering committee of the Open Government Partnership, and we have done a lot to work on women's right of access to information and looking at this right through a gendered lens in recent years, but clearly there is still more to do. So now let's turn to Soraya Begum, Information Commissioner in the Information Commission of Bangladesh. And Soraya, I'd like to hand over to you for your 5 minutes and hear how much these concerns and these recommendations resonate with what you're doing there in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, Tavisha, Laura from Qatar Center, Chair YCIC, representative from UNESCO, UN Women, Commissioner from Kenya, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon, good morning, or good noon, where you are. Thank you for inviting me and letting me to say a few words. I thank UNESCO and ICIC Qatar Center for arranging such an important webinar on promoting gender equality in the right to information for women. Excellencies, we all acknowledge access to information is the key to human rights for all, but commonly access to information is always or usually or underserved and underprivileged in their family, workplace, or society as a whole. Although there are some improvements, it's been improving across the countries, but when we take the disaggregated data, as Laura said, women participation in public life, economic activities, or effective decision-making level is far away from our expectation. This backdrop remains, unless right to information, access to information for women is ensured, other human rights like poverty, elevation, education, health, economic opportunities, and political decision-making level cannot be achieved. Excellencies, on this backdrop, I can say a few words about my country, Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, we have the law from 2009. We are exercising it for the last 12 years, but if we see the disaggregated data, whether women participation is very less. From the commission, we can see it is less than 10%. But it is very unusual in our country. Our Prime Minister from 1991 to till today is a lady. Our speaker is a lady. Our leader of the opposition is a lady. Deputy leader of the parliament is a lady too. Still, we have to go far away. If we can come to the question that Laura has asked, Laura has identified that UN agencies, particularly different committees, bodies, and there are many, particularly like UNDP, CEDAW, and other bodies like specialized agencies like Commission on the Status of Women, Human Rights Council, UNDP, and others are working on and pursuing on women rights. Although different rights of women has been pursued, but not the access to information is there. Maybe their mandate and SDGs goal and targets could not be matched as yet, as expected. We may look into the mandate and highlight the importance of RTI to incorporate in their strategy, policy, and action plan. Excellencies, we know high-level political forum is looking into meeting the SDGs goal, although voluntarily, but since the priority areas for developing countries particularly remains like poverty, health, education, and also gender is there, but access to information goal and target 16.2.10 is mandated to UNESCO. Therefore, UNESCO and high-level political forum should have more dialogue to recognize that all other goals will not be implemented unless women access to information is addressed. Second question, what Laura is asking, how can the national and international recommendation be pursued?
And Commissioner, if I could just hurry you a little bit to wrap up,
sure,
please.
sure,
Thank you.
Sure. We may recommend that UNESCO can make a committee or body, including ICIC, Carter Center, and some representatives from information commissions, to look into the issue, analyze some of the laws, policies, and gender perspective in periodic basis, and find out ways and means to incorporate the access to information by women. The committee body should have dialogue with UN agencies, committees, bodies as well. And third question, what she was asking, who should be involved in implementing the recommendations and what role for Information Commission? The state parties, excellencies, government should be involved through UN bodies, UNESCO. Information commissions are the implementers. They should be involved and find out the gaps in their access to information laws and policies. A long-term strategy paper along with time-bound action plan should be pursued, incorporating women access to information. In Bangladesh, we are on the way to prepare a strategy paper for 2022 to 2030 with special attention to women access to information. An action plan is also there to be prepared. We are looking to your recommendations. We are looking input from your today's discussion and maybe more from other sides, or Laura. You can help us to make this strategy paper and also the action plan for Bangladesh and elsewhere. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. All excellencies and Laura particularly, and Helen to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Soraya. Thank you, Commissioner. Excellent concrete recommendations there about how we actually take these Laura's recommendations forward, and emphasizing the link to the Sustainable Development Goals. Clearly, without information, which is one of our Sustainable Development Indicators, we really will have difficulty moving forward on all other of the 231 indicators. Last but not least for our discussion panel, and do post your questions in the chat, everyone, so that we can maybe try even answering in writing. If anyone listening has any specific comments or questions, we welcome them in the chat. I'll now turn to Jaime Moreno Valle, Senior Legal Officer at the Department of International Law at the Organization of American States. Jaime, over to you for your perspectives on this important issue and these important recommendations. Thank you. And again, if you could kindly be brief.
I will be as brief as I can. Thank you so much. In the interest of brevity, I will just do a blanket acknowledgement of gratitude for the invitation to all the organizers. I will try to share my screen with you. Hopefully it'll work. And I'm going to talk about the model law on access to public information, and you will see why it is so relevant to this particular discussion and the recommendations. This is a soft law instrument that was adopted by the OAS last year at the highest level, which is the Ministers of Foreign Affairs. And it is a 2.0 because we had a 2010 law. And so this one draws on 10 years of experiences, not just from the OES, but also from the information commissions around the region. So what have we learned in these 10 years? And more importantly, what are the issues that need to be addressed more robustly? One of those issues was precisely the gender perspective. So in the model law 2.0, the gender perspective is incorporated mainly through two pillars. One is active or proactive dissemination, and the other one is through the composition and functions of the guarantor bodies. To a lesser degree, passive disclosure, which is the requests for information. I apologize to the interpreters if I'm being if I'm speaking very quickly. Active transparency or disclosure sets out key information that subject entities must disclose. This includes information that is particularly useful for women, LGBTI+ groups, indigenous peoples, peoples with disability, the elderly, and other groups that the law identifies specifically. They also must disclose the number of officials, their names, positions, hierarchy, and duties disaggregated by gender. Salary scales, bonuses, and compensation of any kind, including information on the pay gap between genders, must also be disclosed. And finally, budget and spending plans and social programs aimed at addressing the needs of specific groups, including, of course, women. Furthermore, they must describe the results of their mechanisms for promoting citizen participation and social controllership. They must disaggregate these results by age and by gender. They must also provide information that is relevant and necessary to promote greater gender equity, including, for example, indicators pertaining to workforce inclusion and health services. They must also disclose indicators of progress and statistics that allow for the verification of the implementation of gender equity within each of the subject entities. In other words, there's a great focus on measuring the outcomes. And finally, they must disclose the subsidies that they grant to specific groups and the actions that they carry out to implement recommendations and standards regarding human rights. Active transparency, of course, must be free of charge. It must not be discriminatory of either the person or the type of information that is being requested. It must be delivered in a timely manner, and the information that is disclosed must be complete. We also stress the fact that active transparency must be effective. In other words, it must be tailored, in this case, to the groups of women that are going to access it. In the case, for example, of remote indigenous communities, we consider it's not enough for the subject entities to simply say, oh, we have a web page, because clearly not everybody will be able to access it. I will not explain this further because I think the graphics are self-explanatory. Requests for information, similarly, should be able to be presented in a variety of ways, also free of charge, allowing each person to request information within their own means and accessibility conditions. The guarantor body, it must have gender parity among its members. Mostly they're called commissions. It should also disclose a list of subject entities that comply or do not comply with gender perspective and norms, that name and shame kind of policy. They must also perform citizen outreach, disseminate access to public information laws that in ways that are accessible to groups like women and LGBT, indigenous people, and so on, groups who are in situations of vulnerability, particularly. The guarantor body must also issue guidelines, manuals, and recommendations, such as those that we're discussing today. They also receive the reports from subject entities, and in those, subject entities must include the number of requests they receive disaggregated by gender. And the guarantor body itself presents reports either to Congress or just or to another branch of government, and disclosing how many appeals were presented, which is something Laura mentioned earlier, disaggregated by gender, and statistical information disaggregated also. That helps to understand the nature and dimension of the inequities and make proposals to reduce the gaps. So to conclude, the model law is a result of a consultative process. The Inter-American Commission of Women has extensive knowledge on this matter, and they gave us their input. So we incorporate gender perspective by design. We recognize the right of access to public information as a key right, as was mentioned earlier in this panel by the ladies that preceded me. This stresses the importance of identifying systemic barriers to access to public information, particularly faced by women. And we establish simple, non-encumbering procedures to access and request information, mainly through active disclosure. And finally, we advocate for a guarantor body or information commission that is autonomous and has the authority and the resources to identify and address the weaknesses in the system that perpetuate these gaps and disparities between genders. So I'm going to stop here, but as you can see, a lot of the concerns that have been expressed and the recommendations in the Carter Center UNESCO effort are addressed by this. So we're very happy, and we think it's a very useful document. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaime. It's excellent that in this second iteration of the model law, you've managed to incorporate some of these perspectives. I think what we're all seeing, all of us who work in this world of the right of access to information, that it has to be an iterative process where we learn what kind of problems we face in implementing this right as we go along. Now, given that we haven't got any comments in the chat or questions, I can only conclude that the high quality of these presentations and the comprehensive nature of the considerations and the recommendations has really left people with no outstanding queries or questions, for which I'd like to congratulate and thank the three speakers. I'll take 2 seconds to recall to everyone that at the end of last year, civil society adopted a declaration, the Right to Know Declaration, coming out of discussions we held on the International Right to Know Day, the Day of Universal Access to Information in 2021. I'll put the link in the chat, and that also has specific language to which Laura contributed about ensuring that there is that all are able to exercise their right to information equitably. I think we know what we want to achieve. The challenge is actually achieving it, but we've got some really very useful practical recommendations to take forward with UNESCO, with the International Conference of Information Commissioners, the Carter Center, and the rest of civil society. So with that, I thank again Jaime, Soraya, and Lucy for your interventions, and I hand back to Lillian to help us wrap up. Thank you. Well, I think I hand back to Lillian. If not, yes, okay.
I'm so sorry.
I'm great, that's good. Otherwise I could do it, but.
I'm so sorry. Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you very much to all the participants in this panel. And just for the closing remarks, I will give the floor to Commissioner from the INAI, Norma Julieta del Rio Venegas. So please, Commissioner, or there is any questions or additional information that, I don't know. There is just the links.
Yes, Lillian. This is Suraya.
Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah, just I wanted to know whether this is only this should be a regular conversation within this group, or just this is one sort of time, then we place the recommendation for UNESCO or How is
Well,
that you look?
actually, this is like an activity to commemorate the International Day, but of course, we want to call the membership of the ICIC in order to detect all the interest of the participants and create working groups from the several topics. One of them, it could be, of course, gender and vulnerable groups. Yes, please, Jaco,
Yes,
go ahead.
yes. Thank you so much, Commissioner, also for that question. I think that if there's an interest, and surely there must be an interest with over 80 participants to this webinar, to continue our discussions and to reflect this also in declarations, in international days, and in the efforts that are put forward at least at the international level, but also at the national level. We're more than happy to follow up with ICIC and see how we could have a follow-up meeting here. I also just wanted to say, I see that there's one question also in Spanish in the chat, and I don't know if we have time for a quick answer on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaco. I wasn't sure if we had time for that, but of course, if we do, the question is, are the other measures that we have to evaluate gender equality in the field of access to information sufficient? So are we yet actually evaluating that in a sufficient way? And if we have time for that, then any of the three panelists, that would be fantastic. Are we counting well enough? Do we know well enough what the problem is? I don't know if anyone has an opinion. Oh, Jaco, I'm tempted to put the question to you because you did gather something on this in your UNESCO data, no?
Well, I think that obviously that we are not counting enough, and I think that is why one of the recommendations is we have to count more in order to give the necessary policy impulse to take this issue very much more seriously. And I think that civil society has a role to play, governments and information commissioners have a role to play. And I think this points to the importance of constituting more data in order to take this element further. I also want to signal that as we are about to launch also our new Access to Information survey, that even the UNESCO survey will now start including some elements related to the gender perspective in terms of access to information implementation. But I think we still have a long way to go to get everybody on board, and that's where the international recommendations are so important. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jaco. Does anyone else want to come in on the question of counting? Or Lillian, shall I hand back to you?
No, it would be for the closing remarks, but.
Okay, well, I think the conclusion is we've done surveys, we've done research. Laura's clearly that actual testing of a man and a woman going in to ask for information, getting treated differently. There isn't enough of that, and there isn't enough of counting the data that we've got on requests filed in a normal way, not as test requests. So a lot more research needs to be done explicitly, as Jaco said, explicitly looking at this gender question. And who knows, maybe by this time next year, we'll be able to come back and discuss this again with more precise data, which would be fantastic. Lillian, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. And now I will give the floor to Commissioner Norma Julieta del Rio Venegas in order to express the final remarks of this activity. Please, Commissioner, go ahead.
Gracias. Hola, muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes a todas, a todos. Me da mucho gusto estar aquí con todas y pues agradecer la oportunidad de saludarlas. Y bueno, en representación de las y los comisionados del Instituto Nacional de Transparencia, Acceso a la Información y Protección de Datos Personales, el INAI, me permito dar un mensaje. En primer lugar, bueno, agradecer desde luego la participación de todas las expertas y los expertos que hoy acompañaron durante las actividades que integraron a lo largo de este seminario. Y bueno, las ideas y las prácticas que escuchamos en esta jornada, decirles que no solo nos invitan a todas y a todos a trazar desde luego nuevos horizontes para la incorporación de perspectiva de género en las políticas de transparencia y acceso a la información. Comentarles que en el INAI, desde tiempo atrás, hemos venido trabajando estos temas. Ayer, en un evento conmemorativo, donde la comisionada Blanca Ibarra, la comisionada Josefina Román y su servidora, pero también nuestros compañeros comisionados participamos activamente en estos trabajos, implementando día a día la perspectiva de género, pues en esta institución, para de aquí poder salir a trabajar y eliminar brechas y áreas de oportunidad para que las personas podamos gozar el derecho de saber en igualdad de condiciones. Ese es nuestro trabajo aquí en México y día a día lo hacemos. Existe, como saben, la Plataforma Nacional de Transparencia y bueno, que es una herramienta que hemos puesto a disposición de las y los mexicanos para que las mujeres también conozcan pues actividades y situaciones de información pública que las pueda empoderar en tomar decisiones. Simplemente quiero decirles que pues es fundamental el desarrollo de estos espacios amplios y efectivos y pues les agradezco a nombre de los comisionados esta oportunidad y este tipo de foros que son definitivamente espacios de inclusión. En el INAI vamos a seguir trabajando sobre empoderar a las mujeres en el aspecto de la información pública, pero no solo a las mujeres, hombres y mujeres, y también estar trabajando en temas de perspectiva de género. Ayer hablábamos de la sororidad que es una parte muy importante. Entonces, pues agradecer a esta comunidad que es muy fuerte y multicultural y pues seguiremos pugnando a favor de esta gobernanza de la información gubernamental en favor de todas las mujeres a través del acceso a la información y la protección de datos personales. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Del Rio. And thank to all. Laura, I don't know if you want to say something still or do you chat it, right?
Yes, exactly. Just the point, and I think you all know where I'm coming from, that I don't think a lack of specific data should derail us from really getting started, because I think we have sufficient knowledge at this point to begin, and certainly it's always great to develop more research, but I really hope that this community will come together and identify some priority actions and really just get started. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much to being here. Thank you to all the membership of the ICIC. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the participants, Helen, Jaco, Jaime, commissioners, Blanca Lilia, Norma Julieta, Soraya, and Lucy. Thank you very much to all to being here. And happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, Lillian. Happy International Women's Day, and it was excellent discussion. Let's keep in touch. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Muchísimas gracias. Hasta pronto. Chao, chao.